Hello everyone, this is Peruselvan. This video is all about demonstrating how to prepare GC3 practical assessment. We're talking about GC3 practical assessment. Before we could start, what is GC3? How we have to prepare GC3? What all instruction has to be followed? Everything will be demonstrated in this 20 minutes video. Before that, you have studied IGC1 and GC2 as well. Combining IGC1 and GC2 forms your GC3. You have studied IGC1 all about procedures. You have studied about risk, the hazard and the control measures, everything in GC2. Combining these two subjects, we will prepare an inspection report in GC3 practical assessment. What's the purpose of preparing this GC3 practical assessment? First and foremost, to see what are the most common hazards that exist in your workplace. Second, to check whether they are adequately and suitably controlled, and if required, any additional suggestion that can be provided in order to reduce the risk associated with your daily activities. It starts with your observation section, then comes your management. These are the two sections that will be discussed in this entire practical assessment. Your observation consists of your hazard identification, then comes your control measures and your time scale. Whereas your management section is divided in 5 different parts, which first is your introduction, then comes your main findings. When we talk about the conclusion, we suggest some good amount of recommendation, and then we summarize your report. We'll start with the observation. Before that, let's see how this mark is being allocated. Your observation carry 30 marks out of 100, and then comes the management section. Your introduction carry 5 marks, then your executive summary carries another 5 marks. A major attention is given on this main finding, which carries 30 marks altogether. And then comes your conclusion and recommendation, which carry 15 marks each. So you score 60 out of 100 in order to clear this particular practical assessment. Let's get started. Your observation, like I said, it consists of 3 different areas. The first area we'll focus is hazard identification. Now, what are we going to identify? When I say hazard identification, you're going to target on the unsafe fact and unsafe condition that exists in your workplace. Act which is performed by a person. The condition that's the area or the environment where you work, right? So these are the 2 things which are responsible for any kind of incidents in your work area. So you need to identify 20 to 25 number of uncontrolled hazards that combine your unsafe fact and unsafe condition. When you write this particular observation, do not write in 1 word or 2 words. It has to be you're narrating that incident that you have witnessed. You're narrating that particular unsafe fact or unsafe condition you have observed. Now, when I write an observation, it must cover the location where you have observed. It must cover the risk associated. It must also cover a specific consequences. Let's take an example on this hazard identification. Electric switches and sockets were in damaged conditions and also left uncovered. Also, cables in lobby wall appear damaged as well. Now, this is my observation. Is it an unsafe fact or an unsafe condition? It's an unsafe condition. What happens with this unsafe condition? Is there a risk associated? Yes. What is the risk associated? Coming in contact with this damaged cables or coming in contact with this uncovered sockets. What happens when I come in contact with such cables? I might get electric shock. It can lead to burn injuries. Probably it can lead to any kind of muscle cramps or any further fatality, depends upon the severity level. So these 3 must be mandatorily filled by a candidate when it comes to your hazard identification. Now, this particular observation that you witnessed, how would you control this? If you are the person, what actions will you take immediately on identifying such unsafe condition? That's your immediate action. Now you have saved the day by implementing an immediate action. How about saving future? Can we ensure this act or this condition will not repeat again tomorrow? Definitely not. So in order to save that tomorrow, I would also think about the long-term action. One, you're correcting it, and second, you're preventing that particular conditions to happen again. Keeping this in mind, when you write an hazard identifications, do not repeat the work activities or do not end up giving only the risk and failing to do not giving specific consequences. This observation will not be considered. So do not repeat your activities. Do not end up writing only with the risk. Make sure you're writing specific consequences. Let's take an example of this control measures. Now I spoke about control measures. I said corrective and preventive. That's nothing but your immediate and long-term actions. For the same observations, I have good number of control measures here. I'm disconnecting the cable, I'm isolating the supply. How much time do you require to do this? Probably an hour or two. So second control measure I've given here is secure the cables and arrangement for insulation has to be done. I'm talking about the long-term actions, plan for regular supervisions, plan for repairing the damaged cables. So based on your recommendation, based on your control measure, you give a realistic time scale. Very common mistake that we do is we always tend to give immediate as our time scale in the corrective measures. No, immediately the only thing which I can do is I can stop that particular activities. In order for me to implement any control measures, I require some time scale. So be realistic with that particular time scale. So here's your observation, a quick recap. So you identify the unsafe fact or the unsafe condition, and then you write the control measures, the corrective and the preventive measures, and give the appropriate time scales. When it comes to control measures, do not give a general control measures. Be specific in what you're writing, such as PP, training or inspections. These are general terms. You need to be specific. If it's PP, what type of PP? If it is inspection, where you want to conduct the inspection, on what you want to conduct the inspection, training on what. So these things must be specific. So comparatively, I identify as a candidate 20 to 25 number of unsafe fact or unsafe condition. Now overall, when you write this observation, make sure you're covering at least 5 category of hazard. When I say category, it covers fire, electrical, chemical, could be biological or mechanical, any category. Make sure you're covering at least 5 category. We'll move to your next section, that's management. Now like I said, management starts with your introduction part. Things that you need to keep in mind before starting management. Now this management report, when it says it's a report, it has to be concise. You're not supposed to write excessive wordings and make it so elaborate. No, be crisp and clear with what you're explaining. The word limits for management section is 700 till 1000 words. Let's start with introduction. Introducing your workplace that has been selected for your inspections, which covers the name, the location of that inspected place, the date and time you have started your inspection, the work activities that has been observed during this inspection, the number of workers, the number of the type of equipments or description about machinery is being used. Talk about the shift pattern. If you do not have a shift pattern, talk about the working hours, right? And you close this introduction section with aim of this inspection. What is your objective to carry out this inspection, right? We'll move to the next section is main finding. Now major part or major attention is given on this main finding. When I say 30 marks, candidate tends to write more. Candidate tends to give excessive explanation, which is not required. How main findings are written? Main findings, you are supposed to write 5 main findings. When I say 5 main findings, they are nothing but 5 category of hazard. Now let's take an example of one category. Example on this main finding, I'll go with electrical safety. Write this main finding in 3 different sections, 3 different parts rather. Your first part should be explanation on issues or discussion on issues identified under this particular category of hazard. Then comes your laws that has been violated. Now any unsafe act, unsafe condition existing in my workplace, which means I'm violating some law, which means I've failed to follow some regulations. Identify the most relevant regulations or the standards and demonstrate that particular standards and regulations. The last part is given for your suggesting additional control measures. You have witnessed these issues, so what are you suggesting? So you are going to suggest some good control measures. Very important is you're going to give me reasons or give that particular control measures a reason why are you suggesting such recommendation, right? So you need to justify your recommendation that you have suggested. Let's take an example on this. I said discussions on issues. Now here I have discussed the issues that fall under this category. Damaged electrical cable or uncovered, unsecured sockets, cables on the walkway. So I have discussed issues that fall under such category. And I've given a good explanation on why these issues has to be rectified immediately. I spoke about law that has been violated. So here I have selected these articles under conventions C167, safety and health in construction. So I have taken that relevant articles. I'm demonstrating that particular standards related to my main findings or the hazard category. And here I have suggested some additional control measures. So in addition, how we can rectify these issues. These are my suggestion. I've also justified why I am suggesting such recommendation. Do not forget to mention the cost associated with this control measure that you have suggested. What's my next section is conclusion. Once you're done with this 5 main findings, now remember this explanation should be for each and every main findings. For all the 5, you give the similar way of explanation. We move to this conclusion part where I'm going to conclude my inspection. Overall, what have you observed? I say my candidates to write in 3 different parts once again. Conclusion, your first part, you discuss the issues that you have covered or inspected overall in this observation. Keeping this in mind, not to add any new issues which is not at all mentioned or discussed in this particular inspection. Second part is given on discussion on recommendation that you have suggested. Now the above unsafe fact or condition that you have discussed, what actions have you suggested? So you have suggested some good amount of control measures, some recommendations. Discuss them in your next paragraph. We'll move to the third most important paragraph is how you can convince your management to consider and implement the recommendation. Definitely your management will not easily accept what recommendations you have suggested. So you need to convince them this is why you have to accept that particular recommendation. How I can convince? Either I talk about the benefit they're going to get, or I will talk about the consequences they will face failing in considering that particular recommendations. There ends your conclusion parts for 15 marks. Moving to second last section is your recommendation column. Please write this in a tabular column. You would find this tabular column in appendix 4. So you would find this tabular column in appendix 4. Your first column that talk about recommendations. This recommendation is written for this 5 main findings. So take first main finding as your example. So in my first column under recommendation, you would write what control measure. Simply mentioning that control measure, that's all. No need to give a lot of explanation. Your next column says resources implication, where you're going to talk about what all required for you to fulfill this recommendation suggested. Could be money, could be resources, or could be manpower or man hours. These things can be mentioned. Instead of mentioning a lump sum amount, you can break down the cost in the second column. Moving to the next column is priority, where you're going to prioritize your control measure. Depending upon the risk level, whether you can prioritize as high or you can prioritize as medium. Now why not low? Because we have selected the critical issues. So definitely we will not give a low priority. So we will be focusing on high or medium priority. So next column comes is your target period or target date. If it is high priority, I would be dealing that case as soon as possible. So if it is medium, depending upon the priority, I would take another time period in order to implement that control measures. All the 4 columns are interlinked. Understand the link between these columns and you fulfill this recommendation criteria. Moving on to the last section is summarizing the entire report. Once this inspection is done, once the discussion to management is done, and then comes your summary part. Now inside this summary part, it's only for 5 marks. You're going to squeeze everything, you're going to summarize entire inspection that you have done into few lines, starting with a small introduction on what is this inspection about, and discussing or just the overview of a main finding and the conclusion and recommendation. Talk about issues identified. Can't stress only on main findings. Talk about recommendation that has been suggested. Very important is benefits to your management. How your management is going to be benefited if they're going to implement this control measure. Remember in conclusion area, we spoke about benefits and consequences that can be discussed. In this section, we target the benefit. Why? This is going to be the front page of your report. So a manager would start reading your report from summary. So which means the benefit will attract me towards the other part of this particular report. Alright, so start from once again a quick recap. Starting from your observation, that's hazard identification, suggesting some good number of control measures. Then comes your management. So you're going to prepare the management section based on the observation with the help of your observation sheets. In the management, you have introduction, then comes your main findings, your conclusions, your recommendations, and we end this report with a summary part. What has to be kept in mind? Select an appropriate place for your inspection. Could be your own workplace or it could be any other work site. Make sure the hazard identification is the first thing that you start. Word limit mandatory in terms of your management section. When it comes to management, word limits must be in place so that you will not exaggerate or elaborate your explanation. Then comes be specific to your statement. Never write general statements. Always be specific. When it comes to control measures or when it comes to consequences, be specific with that explanations. Checklist is one. Supporting documents will be provided or shared to you by your trainer. So please use the GC3 checklist. Multiple review has to be done before you could submit this report. When you're preparing a report, make sure you're reviewing it multiple times and ensure you're always using the updated templates that you get from NEBOSH website itself. Alright, once this entire report is done, review it multiple times and make sure you're crossing that 60 bar. Thank you so much for watching this video. Any doubt, you can refer the documents that is attached along with this video.